Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, igniting leadership excellence. I'm Rick, and unfortunately, my co host Emily could not be with us today due to a scheduling conflict. This is episode number 49, and we are interviewing retired Fire Chief Arjuna George for the second time so we can finish up where we left off in the previous episode and we can dig deeper into Arjuna's book. So I want to read his bio here before we get going for those who may have forgotten already and for those who have not listened. For those who have not listened, please go back, listen to episode number 47 as Chief George. He's just got a fantastic group of nuggets that he has passed on. And you don't have to be a firefighter to listen to this podcast because you're going to learn. You're absolutely going to learn, and definitely on this topic of burnout, that applies across the board, regardless of your profession. So, Arjuna is a retired fire chief with 24 years of serving his hometown of Salt Spring Island, British Columbia, Canada. Arjuna experienced the beginning of burnout in mid 2020 and began a journey of better self care. Through his recovery, he found a new purpose in life by supporting others to live their best life through his coaching and teachings. Arjuna's vast experience with first responders and how they respond and work under stress will be an asset to all first responders. He is also a certified tension trauma release exercise provider, TRE, certified executive coach, stress coach, and visualization and performance coach. Arjuna is the author of Burnt Around the Edges, A Guide to Mastering Stress and Survival Burnout. He also co-authored Leading the Charge with retired Fire Chief Les Carpluck. He has a podcast called Beneath the Helmet, and his business is Silver Arrow Coaching. Chief George, welcome back to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick. I appreciate you coming back on with us.
Oh, thanks for the invite. It was an honor to sit down with you and your daughter and go through some things in the first episode. So thank you for having me back. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I re-listened to that podcast and I thought, you know, I neglected to ask you in there. We talked about the book a little bit, but I neglected to ask you about your podcast, Beneath the Helmet. Could you tell our listeners about that and what brought that about and who you bring on as guests and who your target audience is?
So Beneath the Helmet its birthplace came from my burnout journey.
Mm.
So when I was going through burnout, there was lots of contemplation, lots of going through my mind. It's like, well, okay, what is next in my life? I was off for a year in total. I didn't know if I was going to go back to active duty. I didn't know if I was going to have to pivot my life. I didn't know if I was going to be just a couch potato for the rest of my life because I was so burnt out. I honestly didn't know. I didn't know what direction I was going. So through coaching, helped me kind of clarify and get clear on writing a book and also starting my business. But in that, I also wanted to really, and this might sound odd, but take advantage of the network that I've built over the last 25 years. And I didn't want to lose those connections with first responders, fire chiefs, firefighters across the globe. I didn't want to lose that. And I was like, how can I still stay connected in the fire service? Because I want to serve the fire service. And I thought, well, the best way to do that and to connect with people that are like-minded, that are, sharing their wisdom through the world through a podcast. Like what a better opportunity to start is to
Mm-hmm.
start a podcast. And I had never done podcast in my life. Up until I wrote my book, I'd never been on a podcast. Very seldom even listened to podcasts. I read more than I listened. But I was like, all right, I need some support for myself personally going through burnout. And I started searching for podcasts around burnout for first responders. And I honestly couldn't find anything around that aspect. There was episodes here and there, but nobody was kind of specializing in that. And same with books. And that's kind of why I wrote Burnt Around the Edges was I couldn't find other resources for that. So I found a lot of podcasts that were all about maybe just mental health, or all about just physical health, or all about tactics of a firefighter, or all about leadership in the fire service. And they're all great podcasts, but I wanted to have a podcast and there's a few out there now that was a little bit more well-rounded and kind of covered all the
Mm. Yeah.
bases. And one of the first things that popped in my mind was I want to talk about everything beneath the helmet.
Mhm.
So when I say that, it's the mind, body, and spirit of being an elite firefighter. So everything beneath the helmet, the brain, the muscles, the spirit, whatever that looks like, I want to talk about all that to be the most elite, the best firefighter that you could possibly be. So beneath the helmet, it was probably between 3 or 4 different names, and then that one just sunk,
Mm.
and it was there from day one. So what I try to do with my guests is to find people that are thought leaders, that are thinking maybe a little bit outside the box. They're not just telling war stories, that actually come with some
Mm.
solutions, some lived experience, some ideas, some tactics, whatever that looks like to live their best life. And that could be operationally, that could be at home, whatever that looks like. And I just want to share that with the world. So some of the things that we talk about on the podcast Beneath the Helmet is maybe a little outside the box. It's a little outside of what the regular podcast you might hear,
Mm. Okay.
talking about, more holistic work, some, breath work stuff, sound therapy, different massage techniques, TRE, all these different things that maybe not the mainstream podcast world is talking about.
Mhm.
And that's kind of my goal, is to share those other resources that maybe are not
Okay.
accessible to everyone, right? So, and then we also have great conversations about fire service leadership, because I'm very passionate about leadership, and I think that is a huge area that fire service could use some more support in, for sure, right? We've
Mhm.
been talking about leadership for decades and decades and decades, but we still seem to have a problem with leadership.
Mm. Yes.
I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to put my finger on it why that's happening, because it's not new. It's still an issue. And then I like to talk about, fitness and how people can live their best lives being as fit as possible through diet, through. So we have nutritionists come on, we have doctors come on, we have psychologists come on. It's not just fire personnel that are coming on. The latest episode was a police officer. Nothing to do with the fire service at all,
Mhm.
but very close in the family of the first responder world, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Talking about yoga in the first responder world. So the latest episode is a PTSD survivor, firefighter Tommy Bolin. His episode just comes out today, actually. Whatever the date is, the 17th of September.
17th. Yep.
Yeah, and so we're on season 3, and season 4 will start in January.
Yeah,
And
congratulations.
yeah, and we just hit 90 guests on the show. So
Oh,
yeah, it's
great. Yeah,
been amazing.
that's great. And
Yeah.
you and I have very similar philosophies about leadership. And just before we started recording this, received the daily news feed from Fire Engineering Magazine, and right at the top is an article about the fire chief in Cleveland, Ohio, has been placed on administrative leave because of an inflammatory social media post he made, an insensitive, inflammatory social media post he made regarding the death of Charlie Kirk. And, it's like sometimes I'm reluctant to open up that feed to see what stupid thing has happened, yeah, in the fire service. And, it's incredible. But with that being said, I want to come back to, a comment that you made about ending up with a name beneath the helmet. I think many times, like with a podcast or with a book, people think it's really easy to come up with a name, and it's
Mhm.
not. With my book, it took a while to be able to settle on the furnace of leadership development. With the podcast, it was just like you. I'd never done a podcast before, and it took a while to settle on the name. So, for people out there to think that these things are easy, they think that it's easy to write a book. No, it's not. None of this stuff is
Sure.
easy. But with that being said, let's turn to Burnt Around the Edges, your book. And I want to read a segment from the introduction that I read on your first interview, because this is packed. This is packed with a lot in this statement here. And quote, you said, quote, as much as I love the fire service, it has also provided me with many unwanted side effects, which is why I am writing this book, unquote. And so I think there's a lot that's in there. We had you dig into that and explain that. And we also had you talk about the differences between distress and eustress and the necessary balance between the two. You talked about the impact of caring for others and responding on some of the same people over and over again just to see them released and put back out, whether it's their home, a retirement center or back on the street just to respond to them again. And and the impact. And then something else that you said that I shared with a friend of mine who's a operations chief in a nearby fire department, and that is a shelf life for firefighters. And that's an interesting concept. But we had to end our interview because of the time frame. But something that I want to start here today, Arjuna, is the stress that's on our families. People don't think about our families. We just here we're recording on September the 17th. Last week was the anniversary, the 24th anniversary of 9/11. And it's great that people say, hey, thank you for your service and so forth and so on like that. But there's a lot of people behind the scenes, our families, that people do not know about. Could you address that type of stress?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the underlining reasons we have such a high divorce rate in first spawner world. I think police is even slightly higher, unfortunately. But yeah, I think the stress that we add onto our partners is immense, and we ignore that most of the time. It's all about
Mhm.
our duty to the community, and our duty to the community should also include our families, right? I know I've missed many important dates and
Mhm.
parties and gatherings, but I also know that I really, really, really tried my hardest to be there whenever I was off, be there with my family whenever. And I think that's why I'm still married for 30 years.
Yeah,
That's why I still have
congratulations.
a great relationship with my kids, is because I actually put in that extra work, and in detriment maybe to my own mental health and my own hobbies and everything like that. But I put my family first above that.
Hmm.
And I think that's why we're such a solid family now. But I know it also strips a lot of people, and I know that people have actually lost careers by being the most gung ho volunteer firefighter they could possibly imagine, going to
Hmm.
every call, missing work to go to a fire call that really
Yeah.
probably is not pertinent to them being there at. It's not going to save the situation. It's not going to change the situation, and they lose their jobs over it. And then you lose a job, and that reflects home life, that reflects income,
Hmm.
and stress levels just go up and up and up. Yeah, I think it's critical. I think we really got to pay attention to our families. We talk about sometimes we give all our energy to everyone else, and we leave that 1%, 2% for our families when we get home. And if we switch that around and actually spend more time with our families, we're probably going to show up as better first responders. We're going to come out happier. We're going to arrive at work with no drama in our life, no stress in our life. It's kind of very, very simple, is to
It
not
is.
necessarily put work first all the time. There's a time
Yeah.
and place where work is important, where work is number one, and that's usually when you're at work. But when you're not at work, you can't have your whole life revolve around fire 24/7. And if you do, it's probably going to take away from other areas in your life. And if
Absolutely.
that's your prerogative, right? That's your call. But for me, family was definitely very critical. Even though I spent a lot of time away, I also spent a lot of time with them when I could.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of my first thoughts around that stress at home, right? Because that stress at home, you might walk in the door and have a terrible, terrible day at work, and your family's going to know it. Your partner's going to know it. Your wife's going to know it. Your kids are going to know it. Even if you hide it as well as you possibly think you can, they're going to sense that negative energy, that anger, whatever that is. So quite a long time ago, actually, my wife started this, and I wasn't even aware she was doing it. Was a transition for me to get home. So
Mm.
when I was a young firefighter, my kids were 2, 3, somewhere in that age, and my wife would start saying, "Okay, kids, when Dad gets home, he just needs 5, 10 minutes to." We call it defragging.
Mm.
So I would go either into the washroom or into our bedroom and just take off my uniform, turn into dad, have a couple of minutes just to decompress. And then when I went out, I was much more present with the whole family versus walk in the door,
Great.
boom, I'm all of a sudden dad. I'm all of a sudden a husband. And I didn't know she did that for many, many years, that she was actually saying that to the kids, but it changed a lot of things that I did not see at first.
Mm,
But having that transition time from being a fire chief, being a firefighter, going home, I coach a lot of people on this because they have that issue of walking the door and all of a sudden they've been a firefighter, they are just doing CPR on a patient, and now, oh, now I got to hug my kids and play with them. It's like,
yeah.
wow, that's got to wreak havoc on our nervous systems, on our mental health, and our wellness. And just a 5-10 minute transition is such a key kind of habit to build into your life.
Mhm.
I know some people, they go out in the garden for 5 minutes, even if it doesn't need to get weeded or anything. Just have that little separation from work life to home life. And then after the 5 minutes of weeding in the garden, all right, now I can go in and be present with my family, right?
Yeah, that's a great tip. I remember more than one time when the girls were younger and I'd come off duty. One of the fortunate things is my uniform was in the locker at the firehouse. So I went there in my civvies and I came home in my civvies. But there was a few times eating breakfast, like in the summer when the girls were in the school, where my wife would say they would say something to me, and I'm off in La La Land, and my wife would say, "Hey girls, Dad's still at the firehouse." You know, and that helped. But talking about the family stress, I want to share with you and share with our listeners something that I did that I thought was neat, that I found out a week later that had a negative impact on my family. And it was back in June of 2020 when we had the High Park fire here in Larimer County, Colorado. I was up on the second day of the fire, and I was given an assignment to just go double check on, the structure assessments. And so I was up on this road and was watching the fire, pop up above the trees about a half mile away, and I was taking a picture of it. And I noticed I had cell service. Wow, I can't believe I got cell service up here. I texted that picture to my wife and my two daughters, and I said where I'm at, and I said, I'm safe, I'm okay. Yeah, and I'm thinking, oh, this is great. This is really a cool picture. Well, I found out about a week later, Arjuna, I scared the living daylights out of them. Something that I thought was neat, they didn't, because they were concerned for me. And then just this past year, after all those years I'd spent in the fire service and been retired 5 years or 4 years last year, I found out from my wife how much worry and concern she had for me when I went to work. And so, folks, please, if you missed what Arjuna said, rewind it and listen to it again. And don't neglect your families. Don't neglect our families. So, moving on from,
Just one of my favorite things about that is, don't ignore or don't give the rest of yourself, give the best of yourself to your family. And it's
hmm,
one quote that it kind of sticks with me is like,
that's good.
don't give the rest to yourself, give the
Yeah.
best to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. So, let's talk about burnout. That's the theme of your book, Burnt Around the Edges. Could you describe what exactly is burnout and some of the signs of burnout?
Yeah. So for me, the book Burnt Around the Edges, that's how I felt, was burnt around the edges. I didn't feel like I was completely and utterly cooked through. And that's kind of how I described it,
Mm,
as being burnt out. Is I felt like I was on the verge. And I probably, if I went to work for another month, I probably would be maybe even, you know, never able to work again. Like, I don't
mm,
know what the circumstances would be, but I felt like something made me take a leave at that right moment before I was completely and utterly burnt out. But the burnout that I was going through was pretty extreme. It required a year of me taking time off and pretty much not doing anything except for contemplating, writing,
mm,
and just kind of thinking a lot, honestly. Probably about 6 months of it, I didn't connect with anyone outside of my family. Like, I didn't, friends and everything. I was like, I just need some space. But probably 6 months into it, I was like, all right, I'm good to have coffee now. Let's come over for coffee.
mm,
I just needed that space to kind of decompress. And really what burnout is, I always thought it was doing too much work. And that's a component of it. But really, I love to work. I love doing things that I love to do. I love work, and that's awesome. But burnout really is doing things that don't bring you joy anymore.
That's interesting.
And so you could work in something you really passionately love. You could work long, crazy hours a week and still not burn out. But if you're doing something that really gets under your skin, is not resonating with you as a person, that's when burnout really sets in. So you see some cynicism. You see you basically you're a lack of focus, brain fog, irritability, a change in attitude, change in work performance. There's so many different elements that people could experience going through this. And for me, I used to jump out of bed wanting to go to work. And the last couple of years is like dreading going to work.
Oh,
And that is not how I wanted to live my life. I didn't want to dread going to work. And that snowballed into, all right, this is not the healthy environment for me to continue on, right?
mhm.
So yeah, burnout, like I said, a lot of people think it's just strictly about doing too much work. And it's not necessarily just that. It's doing work that doesn't bring you satisfaction, joy, excitement anymore. And unfortunately, the part that kind of got me was like being a fire chief. I thought was being a leader of the people. I thought it was going to be, uh, you know, setting the vision for the fire service, leading by example. And really, what I found out it was I was stuck behind a desk 99% of the time. Even if I didn't want to be behind a desk, I was stuck behind a desk because my piles of to-do lists were just growing and growing and growing. And then the political side of it. And I know being a fire chief is a political role, and I know you have a responsibility to play that part. But for me, it really rang totally against in this situation. Maybe being a fire chief in another town would be totally different. But in this situation that I was experiencing, it was eating me up versus bringing me any satisfaction in my
Mm,
career. And I would say that part of that moral injury, part of that burnout, part of that compassion fatigue all led to burnout.
mm,
Um, and that's really what, for my own situation, was kind of the nail in the coffin, kind of speak.
mm.
I think everyone's a little different, but really what you're going to start to see is a change in your behavior is the biggest thing. And
Okay.
probably your partners. And if you're married or whatever like that, they're going to be the ones who probably see it first and maybe bring some light to it. But you're going to change this. You're going to see a change in your work performance, your attitude, your sleep. I used to get tension headaches like every single day. And it's
Mm,
like, I shouldn't have a headache every single day. I actually thought I had brain tumors numerous times through my career because, like, how can I have a headache this many times
mhm,
consistently? Body tension, knee problems, back problems, all these things, diabetic issues starting to rise up. I was like, something is going on here, and I'm not taking care of myself. And I think, I honestly see burnout as a blessing in my situation because it really woke me up to seeing what was a priority in my life. And that was taking care of myself so I could take care of my family and continue on my mission of sharing with the fire service and first responders. I think if I didn't have that wake up call, I probably would either be dead or extremely miserable, one of the two. Um, So it was a wake up call and a blessing. And I really truly think that it was a good thing that happened to me, honestly, which going through it at the time, terrible, horrible, never recommended. But looking back on it, it's like, wow, that gave me a huge gift. And that's actually one of my presentations that I share with the world is my 7 gifts of burnout. So
okay.
I truly look at it as burnout as, all right, it taught me a big lesson. And these are the 7 gifts that I wanted to share with the world on how to prevent or how to get out of burnout for first responders.
Mm, okay. I appreciate your transparency with all of this. And something that I thought about here when you talked about impact on work performance. Have you done any research or study into the impact burnout has on decision making on scene of emergencies?
I wouldn't say I've done any research on it, no, but I've definitely experienced it firsthand. decision fatigue, essentially. Decision fatigue, uh, accompanied with brain fog, lack of sleep, a stressed nervous system, a hypersensitive nervous system. You're making terrible decisions. As soon as your body is thinking not logically anymore, you're not making good sound
Mhm.
decisions. So I'm sure as an incident commander or even just as a fire chief outside of an emergency, I probably made decisions that I probably would not make today or 5 years ago because I was in that hypersensitive reactive mode
Mhm. Yeah.
versus the calm, relaxed parasympathetic system, which is your rest and digest kind of rest and relax nervous system. So whenever you flip that lid, that's what they call it, flipping the lid, is you're working from your amygdala, your fight or flight response,
Mhm.
your fear response is engaged 24/7, and you can't make logical, good, sound decisions when you flip the switch and you're in that mindset.
Mhm. Yeah. Hey, folks, for those of you who may recall or who have not listened, now Arjuna's fire department is on an island. And there's some things that are very unique to being on an island. One of them being is when there's a large incident, mutual aid is a long ways off, and we talked about that last time. So, Arjuna, that's a different level of operational stress that comes into play when you have a long-term complex incident, and it's just you guys and the cavalry's a long ways off. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I think, well, there's multiple things on that. So there's the mutual aid, and there's also just living in a small community. We have 13,000 people in our community. It's a kind of a tourist destination, so it grows to 30,000 in the summer, but most of the time it's about 13,000. And so for the response alone, we're responding to people that we probably either know or have worked with or somehow are connected with the person that we're dealing with. So a car crash, a cardiac arrest, a house fire, somewhere along the line, someone on our team is connected to that person. And that adds a whole another stress to responding to your own. Like when the pager went off for a MVI, motor vehicle incident, the first thing that popped in my mind was like, oh, who am I going to respond to that I
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
What kid am I going to respond to that's the same age as my kids? Is it my kids? Oh my God. Like all these different things go through your mind. And that anticipatory stress is so prominent in the fire service. We're waiting for that next call. When's that call going to come? Especially if you have a leadership role, such as a duty officer, command, whatever that looks like, battalion chief. You're sitting up at night, potentially, sometimes thinking about when's that big mall fire going to happen? When is that 4-story seniors resident fire going to occur? Am I going to go to a call that
Mhm.
involves one of my kids? Like those are all things that go through our minds when we're trying to sleep and trying to recover and trying to get ready for the next day. So that's a huge aspect in that small town community. And then the fact of no mutual aid, like we talked about in the first episode, for wildland, yeah, we got mutual aid. They're probably fairly fast, but everything else we do in our community, from first responder to rescue to hazmat to confined space to medical, it's us. The only help we have is from other communities that are a ferry ride away, and they're also strapped for resources and everything like that. So maybe we get a truck, or maybe we get 4 people that come and help us. We're not having this huge army of fire trucks and firefighters come and help us. It's a very small group, which has also made a very political argument for why we have the amount of firefighters we have on Salt Spring, why we have the amount of fire stations we have on Salt Spring. And it's an education piece that we still try to work on routinely, rinse and repeat, because it's just not for a normal person in the community. They don't understand the concept behind that
Right.
mutual aid resource and the support and what's required to actually work safely at a single family house.
Hmm.
So all those stressors are impacted. One of the biggest stressors I had as a duty officer, we would take our vehicle home as a command vehicle home and respond after hours to any emergencies. And I responded to a fatality MVI, and one of the cars involved was my father-in-law.
Well.
And that was probably one of those like, oh my God, like what am I going to witness here in a second? When I roll up
Hmm.
on scene, didn't know until I got on scene that my father-in-law was involved, and the other person was the one who passed away, and I just could not. Oh, the stress that was going through my mind at that
Yeah.
moment was like, what am I about to see? Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
It
whole
is
nother
really,
ball game. Whole
yeah.
nother ball game.
Emily was on duty on a Sunday afternoon. My duty phone rang 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She's on the other end crying. She's supposed to be at work, and she's telling me that she's been involved in an accident, and almost simultaneously, the tones go out for a injury, motor vehicle accident. And so I got to respond on that, to her. And for the people who've never experienced those things, they are incredibly stressful, or getting a phone call from or a radio call from dispatch, walking into a fire station saying, "Hey, you need to take a look at the notes on the computer," and it's my father-in-law. And
Totally.
so those
Totally.
things, they definitely create stress that a lot of people don't think about. And then the bean counters, the bean counters who look at the bottom line and they have no clue whatsoever. But that's a whole different, you know,
Yes.
conversation, related to that. So a
And I
lot of
think all
people.
those little, I think all those little stressors really brought me to burnout over time
Mm,
because I feel like I have elements of PTSD. I don't feel like I'm full blown PTSD for sure. I think I have elements of it for sure that led to burnout. But all that trauma that I experienced, and you can think of every nasty call that's out there, I've probably seen and been involved in it somehow. It's just stuck in my system. I
mhm.
didn't do anything about releasing it. Talk therapy, yeah, it can help, but sometimes when it's in the body so much that you can't talk it out. You have to find other ways to release it, right? Which is where that TRE came into my world that really helped me, right?
Yeah. One thing here, living and working in the same community is, and I'm sure you experience this too. You drive by places, oh, I remember this call here. I remember that call there. I remember who was killed here. That drowning, that fire, and so forth like that. Because I made the comment to my wife one day, we were talking about, military aspect, and I says, and I am not in any way disparaging combat veterans. When I say it, I'm a veteran myself. And I said, well, those guys, they've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they are coming back home. They're removed from the environment. They got the memories, they've got the post-traumatic stress that they're dealing with. I says, they are back home. I said, I don't get to do that. And she said, what do you mean? I said, because I could drive by 100, 200 places here in the city and remember, and it'd be the same thing for you. You're on that island and people, and it's a different level of stress. Now, you mentioned PTSD, and I have a friend here in Loveland, and she's a counselor, and she says I dropped the D. She says I don't want to approach it as a disorder, but a term that I heard a couple of years ago was an interesting one, as post-traumatic growth.
Sure.
You familiar with that one then?
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
100%. And I think
uh,
that's how we got to look at it is anyone, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, so I'm just speaking from what I experienced my own self is trauma, burnout, all those things, you can use them as a good to build yourself into a better person. And that's where that post traumatic growth comes from, is not to take it as a label yourself as you have a disorder and life is hopeless from this point moving
mhm,
forward. No, it's that you can use those tools to share with the world, save lives in other ways that you never even imagined by sharing your story, your lessons, and the tools that you use to kind of help support you, right? So
mhm.
I think that post traumatic growth is the secret sauce to moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. I want to read another quote out of your book and then jump into another section. And you wrote, I feel today's leaders are being groomed to be disposable. So, with that being said, and you mentioned the amygdala here a few minutes ago, could you talk a little bit about the uh, autonomic nervous system, the F3 that you have in your book, and the vagus nerve, and how all those things play into burnout and stress?
Well, the nervous system is something that nobody ever taught me anything about. I don't recall ever learning about it in high school or school itself. No fire college ever told me about my nervous system. Maybe in the last couple of years, we started to talk more about it in trauma aware workshops and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, where we would talk about the brain and how it functions, but a very very surface level discussion about it. Never really digged in deep. And when I learned what the nervous system does and how much it impacts our bodies and our thinking and our way of life, I was kind of like mind boggled that why did I not know this before? And I want to know as much as I can about it. So yeah, I honestly think the nervous system is where we have to start for first responders, to keep ourselves operating at the best ability we want to. So there's kind of two branches in the nervous system. There's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And I would say the sympathetic is essentially that aroused state where you got chemicals going through your body, hormones going through your body, you're ready for that fight or flight kind of response. And like we talked about in the last episode, there's times and places where stress is important for us. If we want to, we want to flee a situation, we need that stress in our body to get us out of that
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah.
If we want to win a combat challenge, we need a little bit of extra stress in our bodies to give us that extra adrenaline rush to get that best personal time. But the problem is a lot of us, including myself, we stay in that system
Mm.
for our career. We're hyper vigilant. We're
Mm.
always ready for the
Yeah.
next call. We're always ready for what's going to happen next. We go to hotels. I've talked to many people. They go to a hotel. The first thing you do is check the escape routes, smoke alarms,
Yes.
sprinklers. And I'm like, okay, that's smart. But also, are you super paranoid because your system is so ready for danger that that's your first thought is to check all that stuff, right? And I understand there's pros to that. It's not a negative, but it also just shows you how much you're on that hyper vigilant state all the time. And I don't think there was many times in my career that I kind of came down into parasympathetic, which is that rest and digest for more than a couple days. When I went on holidays, it probably took me 2 or 3 days to kind of wind down,
Yeah.
then a couple of days to get in that rest and digest. And then my brain and my nervous system, all right, you're getting ready to go back to work, start
Hmm.
thinking about work again. So really, I had 2 days off, basically a weekend, um, to rejuvenate. It doesn't work well, right?
Yeah.
One of the best holidays I ever did was a cruise to Alaska, and there was zero internet and zero phone on the cruise ship
Mm.
for 7 days, and I was 100% disconnected. And I felt probably within 24 hours I was in that rest and digest, which was incredible. Because even just having that cell phone on you is like you're connected to the fire
Yes.
world either
Hmm.
through text or social media or the news. You are still working essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So the parasympathetic is the other side of the branch of the nervous system that is that rest and digest. And that's where we should be living most of our life, and turning on that sympathetic when we need it, but turning it off when we want to rest and digest.
Mhm.
If we want to learn, if we want to grow in our fitness levels, if we want to become, you know, smarter in our field, we need that rest and digest for our brain, our bodies, our muscles, our nervous system to recover and actually start, becoming a better you. Sleep. Sleep is when we're supposed to recharge and get our body back to normal so we can, perform the next morning. And when we're in a sympathetic state, sleep is not an option. It's not a
Mhm.
great option, anyways. We're very shallow sleepers and we need that recovery time. And we don't spend a lot of time on recovery in the fire service. A lot of it's
Yeah.
action, a little bit of prevention, but recovery is one of those things we are just starting to talk about more, that we need to really take care of our recovery time, and not work a fourth job and not think about work 24/7.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because you're talking about, in that recovery, and I'm thinking about the high rate of cardiac events in the fire service. And often, or most of the time, it's attributed to, oh, you're just out of shape. but really, how much of it is connected to what you're talking about, the body's response to the stress and the burnout? Because we do see people who are in fantastic shape that still suffer a cardiac event. So I want to move into the next area here as we wrap up this interview, Arjuna. We've talked a lot here about stress and burnout and the sympathetic, parasympathetic, so forth like that. But let's leave our listeners with what they can do to help overcome this. Those tips that you have in your book. Could you talk about that, please?
I think there's a plethora. This could be, this kind of part of my seven gifts as well, as to share those little nuggets. And for me, there was a couple of things that really resonated with me was getting outside. Honestly, as a fire chief, I went to work when it was dark, came home when it was dark,
Mm,
did some work, went to bed, rinse and repeat. And I live in a beautiful community on the West Coast, and there's trails that I've been here for years and years and years, and I've never even walked them once
mm,
until I went through burnout and saw, all right, need to, not just for my own physical health, walking, moving, but just that getting out in the woods for your own mind to be able to think clearer. Some of my best ideas come when I'm going for a walk. I
uh,
just,
mhm,
because my body's in that movement state and also that rest and recovery state, that I can now start to think.
mm,
And when you're in that sympathetic, you don't think very well. um, and for me to have ideas about books or articles or podcasts or whatever that looks like, it all comes from going for a walk. So that's a critical thing that I think people can easily do. It's free. Get out, move your
mm,
body. It's good for your mind, good for your body itself. For me, there's also a lot of things around. It's not just our mindset, it's not just our environment, but it's also what we put in our bodies. So eating
mm,
as clean as possible, reducing caffeine as much as possible, reducing alcohol as much as possible. And I went on a plethora of supplements to recharge my adrenal glands, my liver,
mm,
my nervous system, rebalance all that stuff. And that was through blood work, working with doctors, because it's not just a thought thing. It's not just a brain thing. It is a physiological issue
mhm,
that you have to work and balance out, right? My hormones were completely out of whack. So through blood work, I actually found out that my testosterone was basically at the
mm.
floor. And my estrogen had actually switched because of the stress levels and the cortisol in my
Interesting.
body. It switched around all my hormones. And I wouldn't have known that without blood work. And so it's called the Dutch test, is one example. But I did the Dutch test 2 times now and figured out that what I need to do to get my testosterone back up, which is good for any human being, it doesn't have to be just a male. But I would never have known that if I didn't do blood work, if I didn't do these tests to kind of
Mhm,
figure out where I am. Because you can work on your body, you can go to the gym every day, you can see a therapist, but there's still some elements in your body that aren't going to be resolved without some support from supplements,
mm.
IV supplements, water intake, hydration. Our nervous
Yes.
system is begging for water.
Mhm,
And when we drink coffee or alcohol, 90% of our beverages that we drink are sodas, coffee, and water, or coffee and alcohol. Our body is not going to live very well, healthy in a healthy state, right? It's going to be starving for that
yeah.
water. So water intake was a huge change in my life. I had 2 vasovagal syncopes where I passed out, totally just out of the blue, unconscious. And dehydration was a big part of that. It was my stress levels plus dehydration. And now I drink water all the time, like as my go-to drink
Mm,
to drink now, because I know how important it is. I honestly think seeing a therapist is mission critical for anyone going through this kind of thing. It could be a therapist, could be a friend, could be a coach. But I also think before you do that, you have to work on your body. And for me, I found this tool called TRE, which is tension trauma release exercises. And what that does is it essentially fatigues your core fight or flight muscles, which is your bottom of your feet all the way to your lower back. and it brings you to a stage of fatigue where your nervous system starts shaking.
Mm,
And when your nervous system shakes, it actually shakes out that stress, trauma, all your experiences that are stuck in your body. It shakes them out, just like a dog does when it has, fright from a fireworks or a gunshot.
mhm,
Just like wild animals do when they're getting chased in the safari. You know, a cheetah and a gazelle are getting chased in the safari. There's two outcomes for that gazelle. It can either get eaten by that lion, or it's going to go off
yeah,
into the bush,
mm,
shake off that stress and trauma of being chased by a predator, and it's going to stand up and walk away like nothing ever happened. And that's what we are meant to do. We are meant to release that stress and trauma. So when you see that car crash with your father-in-law involved, and then just go back to bed, all that stress, all those chemicals that went flooding through your body are just sitting in your body now, and you're trying to go to sleep after that.
yeah,
It's not a successful outcome.
mhm,
So I think we have to work on our bodies prior, which is our nervous system and our whole body itself, prior to working on our heads, working on talk therapy. Because, like I said before, when we're in that flip state and our amygdala is kind of leading the charge, we're not thinking logically anyways. So when you go to talk therapy and you're sitting there with a counselor, a therapist, or a psychologist, your body's still in that fight or flight response, and you're
mhm,
in protection mode. So you're not going to share some of your darkest secrets because you're still in that protection mode. But once you release that and get the body into a relaxed state, then you can start processing the body and the mind, whatever you have to process after that.
mm,
So those are some of the big key ones. Supplements, hydration, so blood work, getting outside, having a coach, a therapist, a good friend who's you can sit down and have a real true conversation with, connecting with people. For me, I thought I was very connected in the fire service, but what I realized going through burnout was I actually kind of didn't use my network to the full ability. I tried to do a lot of things on my own without asking for help. And asking for help is a kind of a rare thing for us as firefighters.
yeah, yeah,
But when you ask for help, and it doesn't have to be just
mm,
critical help that, I'm going through a bad day. It could be a help from doing a chore that you're not familiar with, doing a skill that you've never done before. Asking for help is pretty freeing in the big aspect of things. It's
mm,
once you learn how to do that, it's a game changer.
yeah,
And I think the biggest takeaway for me was learning how to be vulnerable. So vulnerability is one of those things that if you can't be vulnerable with either yourself or with others, you're holding a lot in. So if you can't share that and be vulnerable, you're holding a lot of that
mhm,
inside of you, which is just creating more and more stress, just that rinse and repeat stress cycle going through your body. But when you can be more vulnerable, and my book was the first time being, I would say, pretty vulnerable, it was pretty freeing when I could
mhm,
say exactly how I was feeling, no strings attached. I didn't really care if people agreed with me, didn't agree with me, didn't like it, didn't liked it, whatever that came about. It was my story. I'm sharing it, and what a freeing experience that was to release that and get off my chest, right? Because I would say, especially as a fire chief, I held my cards pretty close to my chest. I
uh-huh,
didn't really show what I was going through personally. Most people thought I was totally fine right up to the second they heard I was going off on stress leave. They're like, "What? What happened to Chief?"
mm,
Because I guarded myself so much. I held that armor on that nobody really knew that I was going through a rough time for probably a couple of years until the day that they got the notice that I was on leave. Right. So, being vulnerable with yourself, being open with yourself, being vulnerable with others, I think it's a superpower. If you can hone that skill, that is a superpower.
mhm,
And it just kind of leading by example, you're telling others that they can be vulnerable and open with you as well. I think a lot of people think vulnerability is a, weakness. You're showing your weak side of you, but really you're just showing that you're human, just like everyone
yeah,
else that you're
absolutely.
with, right?
Mhm,
So
yeah. Well, Chief, thank you for coming back on and digging deeper into burnout and digging deeper into your book, Burnt Around the Edges. I said earlier, I appreciate your level of transparency, and I very much agree with you. Transparency, that leads to authenticity, and it shows people that we are human beings. And, as firefighters, we are often reluctant to admit that we are vulnerable. We don't want to see people like that. And then I think many times that is built up by the public because they tend to put us up so high on a pedestal, and then we can buy off on that, and we forget that we are human beings. So, folks, you can get Chief George's book on Amazon, Burnt Around the Edges, and the other book, Leading the Charge, co-authored by retired Fire Chief Les Carplug. Also, look up his podcast, Beneath the Helmet. And Arjuna, how can people get in touch with you?
Probably the best way, the kind of easiest way is through silverarrowco.com. So www.silverarrowco.com kind of goes to all the different elements, my book, any new writings I got, blog posts that I kind of put out on a regular basis, as well as the podcast. So kind of my life right now is coaching other fire service leaders to not burn out, but also just to live their best lives through time management, through different resources, different skill sets to lead by self. So a lot of times I think we talked about on the first episode, my whole journey was leading others, but I kind of failed leading myself.
Yeah,
And that's how I want to bring light to my coaching clients, other fire chiefs and fire officers across North America, is to lead self first so you can lead others the way you
yeah.
want to, right? So
Okay.
silverarrowco.com, like you said, on the books are on Amazon, and the podcast is beneaththehelmet.ca.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chief George, for coming back. And folks, if you found this podcast to be useful, please like, subscribe, and share. And also, you can visit my website at fireofficerleadershipacademy.com, which Chief George's information and mine will be in the show notes. And visit my weekly blog that is posted up on LinkedIn that releases on Wednesday mornings. So, until next time, we'll see you later. So long.
Thank you so much.